So far, the 2000s have been an up and down century for GM. First, killing off the Camaro in the early 2000s. Then they are hit with massive lawsuits due to the ever so destructive ignition switch scandal that claimed the life of at least 124 people, which they ignored for 13 years, by the way. Oh, and on top of that, there was a global financial crisis which made them borrow $50 billion just to survive the recession. However, they reintroduced the Camaro, only to kill it off 14 years later. But hey, at least it was in Transformers. Okay, I know that was a lot to throw at you so quickly, so let's dissect it piece by piece and start with the recession. The entire world was thrown into a recession, and it had a severe impact on the U.S. car industry. It cost the U.S. government almost $50 billion to bail out GM out. Technically, this killed GM. General Motors filed for a Chapter 11 reorganization on June 8th of 2009. Then, a month later, the original General Motors sold assets and some subsidiaries to an entirely new company, including the trademark General Motors. Liabilities were left with the original GM, renamed Motors Liquidation Company, freeing the company of many liabilities and resulting in a new GM. And voila, it never even happened. Well, except to the taxpayers, who had to foot the bill to the tune of $11.2 billion. There would be a, somewhat bright spot in all of this. For the 2010 model year, Chevy reintroduced the Camaro. It would be aided with an appearance in Transformers Revenge of the Fallen. And, for the first 2 years after reintroduction, the Camaro outsold the Mustang. Then again, in 2013. But there would be a bombshell dropped on a GM in early 2014. February 2014, GM recalls 800,000 Cobalts and G5s. Then, March 31st, GM announced it was going to recall over 1.5 million more cars of 6 different models due to faulty power steering. Of these, over 1.3 million were in the United States, and 3 of the models were also involved in the faulty ignition recall. So, what was the issue? The switch was required to withstand exposure to a vibration without damage or loss of function. Yet it was discovered that during extreme moments of vibration, or even with the presence of heavy objects on a keychain, the switch would change modes from run to accessory without the intent of the driver. The ignition switch was designed to remove power from the vehicle's airbags when in the off or accessory mode. And this is where it gets kind of bad. So, if the switch moved from run to accessory, it would be difficult to steer or brake, and if it were involved in an accident, it would have no power to deploy the airbags. That's exactly what you want in your vehicle. As stated, GM knew of the problem and had meetings about it as soon as 2005. By the way, these were the cars that they put their Mark of Excellence badge on. Some jokes just write themselves. More recalls came in May, leading to a total of 12.8 million worldwide, with 11.1 million in the US. All in all, GM recalled 30.1 million vehicles in 2014. Also in November 2014, emails surfaced that showed GM ordered 500,000 replacement ignition switches nearly 2 months before ordering a recall. But, as is common in America, money talks. GM compensated claimants for 124 deaths, potentially linked to the faulty ignition switches. Originally, they linked the failures to 13 deaths and 31 crashes. The company only counted incidents resulting in head-on collisions in which the airbags did not deploy. In a collision in which 2 young women in a Chevrolet Cobalt were killed when the ignition switch shut off, the engine, GM only counted the death of the woman in the front seat because the death of the woman in the back seat was not caused by the failure of the airbag to deploy. How in the... Do you hate this company yet? Upon its completion, the compensation fund established by GM had offered compensation for 124 deaths, nearly 10 times more than the 13 deaths GM executives reported in April of 2014. However, the true number of deaths resulting from the ignition switch is likely higher, as GM's compensation fund rejected more than 90% of claims. Now do you hate them? Because I sure do. Lance Cooper, the name may be unfamiliar to you right now. However, you won't forget him after hearing about him. Without him, this may have been swept under the rug for God knows how long. Lance sued GM on behalf of the Melton family, whose daughter had died in a crash, obtained thousands of pages of documents from GM, and took it to the depositions of several GM engineers. If you'd like to know way more about this case and the whole recall itself, I recommend reading Cobalt Cover-Up. Regardless, without Cooper, he was pretty much the spark behind this all. He definitely deserves a lot of credit, and like I said, without him, it's hard to tell how long this would have gone on. If it would have even ever been found out, it might have been swept under the rug for the next 20 years, who knows. But naturally, the lawsuits came flying in, approximately 172 of them. General Motors would employ Kenneth Feinberg as a consultant to help them decide how to compensate families of those injured by the recalled cars. On June 30th, 2014, Kenneth Feinberg unveiled a plan to compensate victims of recalled GM cars, including an agreement to pay, quote-unquote, whatever it costs to do so. Which sounds great until you hear that in the first week after the fund began accepting applications, 125 claims were filed, 63 involving fatalities. But as of September 15th, 2014, according to Feinberg's deputy administrator, only 19 deaths are even eligible for compensation under Feinberg's plan. But don't worry, guys, that was the old GM. The new GM is changing for the better. Do you trust you or a loved one in one of their products? Because I sure as hell don't, even a decade later. And under the guise of a new company at that. However, to not end on such a heavy note, let's switch back to the Camaro, because I feel like picking on the Camaro. After being brought back in 2009, the competition yet again killed off the Camaro in 2023, selling just over 5,000 units in 2024, a far cry from the 88,000 it hit a year after reintroduction. But something tells me it will come back. Chevy even promised the nameplate it would come back, just for the Mustang to be reigning over it yet again. Stay hydrated, take care of yourself and your loved ones, and peace.